generally how it looks from a high level. And Connie will then break it down and talk a little bit about the insurance solutions there. As Connie said, we also have most of our session will be on the estate and wasting freeze. Big sort of accounting tax words, but effectively we'll kind of cover what type of strategy this is and why accountants sometimes recommend it. And third and foremost, kind of end it off. Generally I see that some of our situations, some of our advisors seem to have some questions sometimes about the impact of a cash surrender value on the financial statements of a company. So for corporate owned policy. So we'll talk a little bit about that scenario and how that works out. So before I did start, I did want to, and before I did start into more of the technical aspects, I did want to talk a little bit about more of the social aspect. Some of you may have been at Whistler, and I think that if you were at Whistler, you would have heard me talk about this already. But I want to usually start off by talking a little bit about, social primacy. What is social primacy? It's really a recognition that we as humans, we care a lot about what other humans think as well as their opinions, right? So really, at the end of the day, if I'm thinking about, what our clients want, what our advisors want in a lot of these conversations that they're having with us, they're trying to understand what are other advisors doing with their clients. And for high net worth clients, they're trying to understand what are other high net worth clients doing? What type of planning are they doing, right? So generally, I would say that that's where most of our conversation kind of stems, having these type of conversations with advisors, with clients about what we see in the marketplace and how that might translate into their personal situation there. Right? There's an old saying out there, lions with lions, donkeys with donkeys. And, it's kind of exactly what it seems like it says. You tend to group together with individuals that are like-minded or similar to you, right? So really, from a work setting, I guess how it kind of relates is, high net worth clients, generally, they tend to group together with high net worth clients. Business owners usually have a lot of business owner friends. And, breaking into that market, going into that market with a plan and working with a client on it, generally that opens a lot of doors to their friends as well. And, like I said, they usually want to understand what is it about that plan that works for that friend and how they might potentially apply it to them, right? So adding value, it's not just about just talking about insurance most of the time. I would say that Connie focuses more so on the insurance product planning perspective, whereas I focus more on the high level, adding value to that financial process. So it's important to really get familiar with some of that basic estate planning as well as tax planning concepts. Important to talk about the other stuff. And I find that our second piece, our main piece of that presentation there, where we cover the estate and wasting freeze, that's where I find that most of our clients, most of them have accountants that work with them, and they may look at setting up something like that, doing an estate freeze, doing a wasting freeze. And after that's been done, they come to us and we usually tell them actually as to what's going on, how that works, and what the accountants are trying to accomplish there. After we see that, we usually try to also see how insurance might be able to help position that plan and help in making it generally just a little bit more holistic. Okay, so important to talk about the other stuff as well. And really, I think the most important tool when approaching high net worth clients is to provide something of value that they do not already have, right? All wealthy people, they have advisors already, right? Like when we work with high net worth clients, they have a team of accountants and lawyers that are doing their planning. So really, end of the day, we get to see what people like them are doing. And we also get to talk with, the 9 other wealth and tax planning consultants, the 12 other advanced case consultants all over the country, just to understand what they're seeing in their marketplace. And by doing so, when we see these wealthy clients of yours, they usually want to know what are other people doing, and we're able to give them some sort of response as to what we're seeing in the marketplace, right? So really, agenda for today, like I said earlier, roll and redeem strategy. Secondly, rethinking that wasting freeze, which is a common sort of planning tactic that I see when we work with clients who are in that high net worth space and what their accountants recommend. And third, just to end it off, the impact of the cash surrender value on the financial statements. So roll and redeem strategy, I think, you may see a lot of companies that have similar sort of structures like this, right? So I think especially being in where I'm located in the Vancouver marketplace, I generally see a lot of companies that's kind of look like this, where, these Canadians have come in, they've set up one company, generally a holding company, where they then buy a lot of real estate in there for investment purposes, right? So sometimes you see this where, let's say, low level, three-story low rises. I've seen the entire block of it, the entire complex go for sale before. And actually, I've heard a lot of friends where they had parents back in the days looking and buying these for relatively cheaper prices, and now they've gone up significantly. But overall, at the end of the day, a lot of these type of companies, right, where you may be working with clients where they have one holding company with a lot of, let's say, rental properties underneath, right? So basic facts for this sort of scenario where we sometimes see it. Let's say you have around a 50-year-old male. They're financially successful. He's set up this holding company to hold a lot of real estate in their investment properties. He's looking at doing estate planning and he's thinking, all right, okay, I want to pass this corporation with all of that real estate to my kids. He asks his spouse, but the spouse doesn't really want to get involved in managing this corporation. The spouse really just wants to ensure that, should something happen, I don't want any shares of this company. I don't really want to collect the rent checks. I don't want to deal with the management of this corporation. Just give me some cash. Okay. So, I'm going to get into what an estate freeze and a wasting freeze is in a bit more detail for our next session. But generally, when I see this, and sometimes what happens is the accountant comes and say, okay, with your objectives, let's do something, let's called an estate freeze, whereby we're going to exchange your shares of that corporation, your common shares, for fixed value pref shares. And effectively, in essence, what happens is that individual will freeze the value of their shares and have new individuals, usually a family trust or their kids, come in and subscribe for new common shares of that corporation. So in essence, what happens is after this has been done, the estate freeze portion, this 50-year-old male here, he would have shares worth 15 million, which is the value of when he created that estate freeze. Okay. The kids come in, subscribe for common shares. If the company continues growing, let's say it grows to 20 million in 5 years, his shares are still worth 15 million, assuming nothing's been done. Whereas the kids' shares are now worth 5 million. Okay. He's effectively stopped his growth and now the new growth goes to the children's shares. Okay. So after you actually freeze those shares, there's something called a wasting freeze that sometimes happens, whereby you will waste away your shares. Effectively, you're getting a dividend from the corporation. You're taking down the value of the shares, and it's really dual-fold. By doing so, in certain aspects, you're taking down that tax liability at the end of the day, just because of the fact that in this scenario here, if you're doing a wasting freeze from 15 million to 10 million. You've effectively wasted 5 million away, such that at life expectancy, your shares are now worth 10 million rather than 15 million. Okay. Also, in doing so, by wasting the shares away on an annual basis, you're getting retirement income to sustain your lifestyle, right? So kind of helps in dual fold purposes. So they come to us and, we're chatting with the accountants, we're chatting with the client, getting a better understanding of this. And usually when we chat about it, we're looking at estate tax liabilities. Okay, let's cover the estate tax liabilities, $10 million of preferred shares. Potentially, what is the impact here, right? So around maybe 22.7 million if it was under current capital gains tax rates. If it was, after June 25th, at a effective tax rate of closer to around 35.7%, you're looking closer to around, 3.5 million, $3.6 million of taxes, right? But, we understand our objectives a little bit and we take a look at potentially insuring for the full value of the corporation. Okay, that's assuming that, there's other insurance needs out there that, we can have to get to that value of insurance coverage that they want. So effectively, let's say spouse one, or the male in this case, has a life insurance policy that's corporately owned. That corporately owned life insurance policy is for a death benefit of $10 million, and it's a single life in this case. What happens when he passes is, under the under his will, corporation goes to his spouse. So his preferred shares goes to his spouse. That's what he states will happen. So his shares roll over to his spouse, and under the Income Tax Act, there's a spousal rollover that's available. So effectively, since he had a spouse that was alive in this case, he was able to roll his shares over on a tax deferred basis and not trigger that capital gains tax on his final T1. It was rolled over. And in this scenario here, because he also had that corporate owned life insurance policy, the death benefit as well as the corresponding credit to that capital dividend account happens in that holdco, right? So for that capital dividend account, generally it's going to be equal to death benefit less the adjusted cost base of that policy. So they have a capital dividend account, they have a death benefit in there, right? Second, what happens is you're going to redeem those shares using that death benefit, right? Using that capital dividend account, right? So effectively, you're redeeming those shares. And as I said earlier, when it's a redemption of shares, generally what happens is, it's a dividend. So depending on what type of attributes your corporation has, it counts as one dividend or another, right? In this scenario here, since they have that capital dividend account, they're going to elect it to be a capital dividend for the redemption. And in essence, all of those shares would be redeemed by the corporation. Spouse would then have that $10 million. Kids would now have the shares of the corporation, and the insurance proceeds weren't actually used to pay for that tax, right? Of course, if spouse two had already passed away and spouse one was left, he wouldn't have been able to roll over those shares. So in that scenario there would be some taxes and some planning, post-mortem planning that would have to be done. But in this scenario, should it work out in this roll and redeem strategy, this was what you would end up with, right? So when spouse number two passes away, that leftover cash, if she had any, can then be distributed to the children as well, right? So really finding the permanent solution. I'm going to let Connie chat a little bit about this section here.
Thank you, Leon. So this is a very typical case that how someone like Leon in BC, right, in his position as a wealth and tax planning consultant, worked together with me, my new role as an advanced case consultant. So my role is basically to help the client to find the right permanent life insurance solution in this particular scenario. So given the fact that Leon has already helped the client to find out, okay, estate freeze being done and the value locked at 10 million, 50 million and wasting 5 million. So meaning that we are looking at a CDA credit by the death benefit payout minus ACB should be about 10 million, right? So we have quite a certain amount that we are looking at, the tax liability 10 million. And the other thing is the surviving spouse, according to the fact finding that we know he or she doesn't want to be involved. So basically in this case, we may be looking at the single life on spouse number one, right? And of course, using a permanent life insurance as a funding solution for the corporation to have a funding to redeem all the shares from the surviving spouse when spouse number one dies. So what the client requires is, given that they know that there's a fixed value right now, they want to know what is the lowest cost to generate the max value in this case. So again, we don't want to just show the client one solution, right? So normally we will try to compare a little bit about using universal life, UL, versus a par life, which solution is a better solution for the client. Okay, so we'll hope that you can kind of read those numbers, but that's okay. It's a very typical plan comparison that for my role as an advanced case consultant, I will work on and show the advisor, as well as maybe we need to do a joint client meeting together. So in this case, what I have done was, if we look at the far right-hand side, first of all is the client wants to know what is the lowest cost, right? So most of the time when we look at permanent life insurance solution, we will start with the UL, universal life insurance, right? So in this case, again, based on the single life on spouse number one, so this is a male non-smoker, 50 years old. And we know that the coverage amount has to be 10 million. Right, so you can see that I use a $10 million coverage amount. For the UL, in this case, there are a couple of different cost of insurance that I can select from. But because the fact that we want to see the CDA credit with a $10 million, with the earliest possible, right? Lowest cost, max value. So what I have done is I used the annually increase to age 85 as the cost of insurance. Okay, I can explain a little bit later on. And then I use a coverage plus death benefit payout in this case. And in order to run it, we have to do a properly funded UL, right? Given the cost of insurance is annually increased. So we properly funded into the investment account of the UL policy, which I use the stable growth account. If those of you have joined my previous 2 or 3 sessions, talk about the new UL enhancement. We do have a new investment account called stable growth account, which is very stable but have growth opportunity. And remember, I mentioned about the stability coming from the 70-30 asset mix, 70% in fixed income, 30% in equities. We smooth the return, and then it's also vesting, a little bit like our par life par account investment performance, right? And the best part is with this stable growth account, it's guaranteed never to have a negative return. So basically it's principal guarantee. So that's why I put it in this UL solution. I'm using this stable growth account, and I put in 5% for the first year, which we already announced for this year. The credit rate is 4% based on the current market situation. And then we also have the 1% additional bonus. It will last until the end of 2025. So that's why in 2024, basically it's already guaranteed a 5%. So I put in 5% for year 1, and then I use a little bit conservative. Thereafter, I use a 3.5%, right? You can run it, use a 4% or 3.5%, but I use a 3.5%. So I solve for a level premium payable to age 85, right? And then the cost of insurance is done, okay? And then there will be a permanent insurance coverage for 10 million. So with that, the annual premium will be about 147,000, right? A little bit more than 147,000. So pay for, this is a 50 years old, pay for 35 years. The total premium is about 5.147 million total premium, right? Why I do that is because when I look into the CDA credit in this case, right, I highlight it a little bit because of the annually increase to age 85 and the coverage plus death benefit, it ground down the ACB way faster than if I'm using other cost of insurance, like a level cost of insurance or level death benefit payout. So in this case, the CDA credit will reach 10 million as early as year 11, right? If I use a level cost of insurance or a level death benefit, it has to be at least like year 31 or year 38, okay? So this is pretty good in terms of minimum cost and the earliest CDA credit to 10 million. But then I won't stop there. So what I do is I compare using par life. So in order to compare par life, if we go to the far left-hand side, so the first one, I use a par life, which is the estate achiever pay to age 100, right? And in this case, I use the enhanced coverage option, right? ECO as the dividend option in order to keep the premium lower with the same equivalent total coverage of 10 million, like the UL. So it comes up with an annual premium of about $166,000 a year, a little bit higher than the UL AI to age 85. And then because this is a par life, right? I don't necessarily need to pay until age 100. I can also use premium offset in this case. So what I did is I used the total premium of that 5.147 million to equalize into this EA pay to age 100 enhanced coverage. And I will be able to offset after year 31. So I offset at year 32, equalize total premium paid out, even for reduced -1 scenario is all good. So in this case, the CDA credit will reach the 10 million at around year 32. It's a little bit longer than the UL, right? But then when we look at the longer life expectancy, like for example, at year 40, when the client is at age 90, the CDA credit will be about 14 million, which is higher than the UL, which is always about 10 million. Okay, not bad, right? And then I just play around a little bit, right? And want to see what if I use paid up additional insurance instead of enhanced. So in the middle one, right, I use the same estate achiever pay to age 100. And this case, I use the PUA, paid up additional insurance, right? And because of its growth, I will be able to do a little bit lower coverage at the beginning, not too low, at about 9.9. And then after the year one, it will already reach the $10 million coverage. And in this case, because of using PUA, the annual premium will be higher than both enhanced as well as the UL. So the annual premium will be about 233,000. But again, it can be premium offset, right? Because of the growth in the par life policy. So I use the same equalized total premium paid, 5.147, and put it in, and I try to run a premium offset after year 22. So I was able to do it offset at year 23 with current and even current -1 scenario. All good, okay? And in this case, it's interestingly, the CDA credit will reach 10 million at around year 24. Right? So it's kind of in the middle between the UL and the enhanced par life, right? At year 24, it will reach the $10 million CDA credit. And at year 40, the CDA credit will generate the highest one, will be about 16.8 million. So we provided 3 different solutions to give the clients an option to choose from, whether they want to keep the lowest cost with the UL, which will only have a 10 million CDA credit, or they are thinking of, oh, maybe I want a higher CDA credit down the road if, you know, the spouse number one live a little bit longer, right? And, you know, I don't mind to pay a little bit more annually, but the total premium paid in is the same. So this is what I propose to the advisors and the clients. All right, so the next part is the wasting freeze. Should I pass it back to?
If there's any questions.
Yeah. I don't see any question in the chat room. Maybe they haven't posted yet. But anyway, let's carry on. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. So if there's any questions, you know, regarding that, you know, the first, I guess, section of this presentation, feel free to ask. Q&A would be great. If not, I'll continue. Like I said, I think this is really the main bulk of our conversation here, really rethinking that wasting freeze. And I think, you know, from a high level point of view, I often encounter situations where we're working with clients where they have been discussing with their accountants. The accountants are saying, let's do an estate freeze. and then we'll waste your shares away. And if it all goes perfectly, then you're not really going to have a tax liability left. So they come to us and they say, I don't think I need insurance at all, actually. My accountants told me we're going to waste all these shares away. So what do you think about it? And generally, that's where we get a little more involved and discuss with them as to what an estate freeze is, what a wasting freeze is, and how life insurance could still be impactful or could still help out with their situation, right? So effectively, a wasting freeze, kind of mentioned a little bit about this earlier. It's really a tax planning transaction that a business can do after implementing an estate freeze, right? So estate freezes and life insurance can work very well together. Like I said earlier, I find that a lot of our clients, a lot of our advisors come up to me and tell us that, if they've done an estate freeze and they're going to do a wasting freeze, our accountants are telling us that we don't need it. Clients are wondering if they do need it, but they actually work very well together just because of the fact that after you've done an estate freeze, you're freezing the value of your shares. And once that's been done, the tax liability is pretty easy to calculate, right? So wasting freeze gradually gets rid of those estate freeze shares over time. And a perfectly executed wasting freeze can help to eliminate a business owner's tax liability at death. What's an estate freeze, though? It's really a transaction designed to limit a tax liability at death by fixing or freezing the owner's economic interest in an asset at current values and to have that future growth of that asset accrue to the next generation. So in that scenario, in that we first discussed the roll and redeem strategy, that individual spouse one there, he had done an estate freeze, right? So his shares at that point, the corporation was estimated to be or calculated by their advisors to be 15 million. His accountant, lawyers had helped him with that estate freeze, whereby he had effectively fixed and froze his shares at that current value of 15 million. Like I said earlier, generally what happens after that is usually either the kids or a family trust comes in to subscribe for new common shares. And that future growth for that corporation or that asset or that corporation in that specific example, that future growth now goes to the new generation, the new owners of those common shares, right? So some benefits there, really, I think at the end of the day, multiplying capital gains exemption, that could be one thing that they're looking to do, especially if, you could use up potentially a few individuals' lifetime capital gains exemptions. Succession planning, I find that, a lot of clients, when they're in that space, they're looking at, okay, well, not only do I want to do estate planning, but, in tandem, in doing so, I want to think a little bit about retirement as well as how to have my kids come in and grow their equity. So it really helps in succession planning in that aspect as well. So just more from a graphical point of view, I guess, pre-estate freeze structure, commonly you may see something like this where you have a shareholder, they have the shares of a company, and effectively it's really just growth shares, right? Common shares. And let's say that fair market value is $1 million. Their adjusted cost base or what they started that company, what they bought those common shares for was $1. And post estate freeze, they would do they would have their accountants complete some sort of transactions there just to affect this, get this into effect. But effectively, they would switch over their common shares for fixed value pref shares. That value is fixed at $1 million, which was the value it was at when they completed the estate freeze. They have a family trust come in, subscribing for new shares. Okay. So in, let's say, a few years, let's say the numbers were a little different. The operating company is now worth $5 million. The shareholder, his fixed value pref shares have not grown at all, right? It's fixed now. So it would still be at $1 million, but the common shares, that fair market value would then be at $4 million. Okay. So they works pretty well with estate freezes, okay, life insurance. Generally, I think that for a lot of our advisors and clients that are in that high net worth space where they're doing a lot of planning, they generally would work with their accountants and lawyers to understand what type of tax planning can be done. And it really shows that, this client is really understanding of all of these type of things that they have to do. They're not really worried about actually making these transactions happen. They've considered that estate planning and they come to us and, it really does make our job a little easier too. I know that a lot of times, advisors, clients are saying that, do we need this if we've already done this estate freeze and we're planning on wasting it? But, that fixed value pref shares really helps and makes it a little easier to estimate that tax liability. And thus, by doing so, it helps in potentially creating that liquidity to fund that payment of taxes as well as other estate planning objectives. Life insurance works very well with those estate freezes. One of the reason is when you've done an estate freeze, that insurance cash value, the corporate owned life insurance, that wouldn't have an impact on that estate value because that would go to that value is attributed to the common shares, and the common shares are now not being held by that specific individual, but more so by the next generation or family trust. Life insurance can also be owned as well as paid for by the corporation. And we talked a little bit about this earlier, but it does help at the time of death when the death benefit is paid to the corporation. There's also a credit to that capital dividend account, generally once again equal to the death benefit less the adjusted cost base of that policy. That can help in facilitating the payment of tax-free capital dividends to Canadian resident shareholders, which also enables estate planning options that can help reduce or defer their taxes on death. So wasting freeze after you've done an estate freeze, as part of the conversation with the accountants, they might recommend that individual to waste those shares away over time. Okay, usually, let's say around the lifetime of that individual, right? So if they're redeemed during the owner's lifetime, and if you're properly timing it, everything works out according to what the accountants are assuming, there may be a situation where no capital gains could be remaining at death, right? Let's say you had $1 million of shares that were frozen. You're wasting away 100,000 each year. That means you would take 10 years and you would have wasted that $1 million to zero, right? When you're wasting those shares away, that redemption of the proceeds are generally treated as taxable dividends. So when you're wasting it, depending on what tax attributes are in that corporation, you might declare it as, let's say, a non-eligible dividend, an eligible dividend, or a capital dividend, right? So it's really useful if that shareholder requires retirement income. May not be as useful if the shareholder does not actually need retirement income from the shares, right? Wasting tax as well as the tax liability itself, just as a graphical point of view here, under the 50% inclusion rate right now, at $1 million, you're looking at around an effective tax here of around $250,000, right? Using this kind of simulates a 25% tax rate, just to keep it nice and simple here. But let's say $1 million, around $250,000 of taxes based on 25% of effective taxes, okay? If you're wasting that $1 million away over in here, let's say 21 years, at the end of it, you would have wasted all those shares to zero. Thus, your capital gains tax liability and your value of your free shares go down all the way to zero, right? And that's assuming you're wasting these shares over 21 years. If the client is actually doing a wasting freeze, does that stop the conversation about life insurance funding? No, and we kind of provided 3 reasons as to why they may want to still consider looking at life insurance funding. First one, the wasting freeze really shifts that tax liability of the business's shares to the kids. At this point, maybe the kids will need some sort of insurance coverage that the accountant thinks that the parents don't need. Just remember, the kids are a family trust that owns those growth shares. And those growth shares appreciate, right? They go up in value as the free shares are wasted. So when the parents' liabilities go down, the kids' tax liability could be growing there, right? Secondly, wasting freeze, just in our example that we were showing it over 21 years, but really at the end of the day, it is a relatively long-term strategy, and death can occur well before those shares are wasted. That individual could pass away before 21 years. or, they may pass away before effectively wasting away most of their shares, right? So even at a minimum, they may want to look at potential term coverage just to help with covering that tax should they pass away prematurely without wasting away their shares, right? There's still obviously opportunities for permanent coverage, such as other capital gains tax, liquidity for estate equalization, looking at potential tax planning or an efficient transfer of that wealth, or if they have charitable objectives, right? So timing of death is relatively uncertain. Will death actually occur here as this chart shows, or could it happen, let's say, at year 2 or, whatever other years, right? And if it does, is there a tax liability that could be incurred? And if so, how are they going to fund that, right? And I kind of alluded to this earlier, that wasting could be useful when the individual, that client, requires income from the business. But if they don't require income from the business, then it comes to a matter of, okay, what's a good sort of a way of looking at this where it may work out better in their favor, right? Because you have to recall, when the client is wasting away these shares, they're redeeming it, and that's treated as a dividend, right? So if it's treated as a non-eligible dividend, wasting those shares, you're incurring at the highest marginal tax rate, around a 49% tax rate. Capital gains rate at death right now is 26.75. Once again, that will increase after the capital gains inclusion rate goes up to 66.7%. At that point, that capital gains rate will be closer to around 35.7%. Okay. But either way, when you're thinking about it that way, dividend tax rates are still higher than the capital gains tax rate. So if I don't need this income, should I be actually incurring this higher tax rate on an annual basis, right? So life insurance can complement a wasting-free strategy whereby the clients take what they want or what they need from that business from a wasting freeze to fund their lifestyle. And the corporate dollars that are not used to fund a waste could fund a life insurance policy instead. Or they could look at just insuring the anticipated remaining shares at life expectancy. And I'll kind of talk about what we mean by this via an example, okay? So let's look at Bill and Bonnie here, two individuals who, commonly similar to a lot of clients in that space where they're at that age, working with their accountants and their lawyers, and they say, all right, okay, let us do an estate freeze. Okay, so Bill and Bonnie, 60 male, 56 female, non-smoker standard risk. Bill owns the freeze value shares of a holding company, and that holding company has a redemption value of $10 million. Okay. Just other sort of planning that, just other things that he's done just to show that he's done planning is, back in days when the capital gains exemption was $750,000, he crystallized his capital gains exemption. His adjusted cost base was isolated in a separate class of free shares. And essentially because of the fact that he now just has shares of that holding company and they own a lot of passive income producing assets, it's not going to qualify for the capital gains exemption anymore. Okay. So that holding company also holds OK Foods, which is consists of several grocery stores operating through separate companies. They've had a family trust set up such that it's come in to subscribe and own all of the new common shares of the holding company. Bill has 2 kids, and his plan is to transfer his shares of Holdco to a spousal trust on his death. So in essence, what's happened here is Bill and Bonnie, he's got shares, pref shares, where his Class A shares were the ones where he did the capital gains exemption crystallizing. So the fair market value and the adjusted cost base are both at that 750,000 mark. It's Class B shares, the adjusted cost base, for simplicity's sake, we're going to say it's 0. Fair market value is around 9.25 million. And the family trust, since this estate freeze has been done, their shares have accrued in value to $2 million. Okay. And Bill's accountant tells us that they are going to implement a wasting freeze. Plan is really just to waste away that 370,000 of Class B shares annually and not own any Class B shares at age 85. That's their plan, waste away $370,000, but they don't actually need all $370,000. they really just want or need around $250,000 for their annual income, just to sustain themselves, okay? And that $250,000, just for our sake, is enough to recover holdco's refundable taxes, okay? So it doesn't, we're chatting with them, and this is where we come in and, talk a little bit about the insurance planning that could take place, right? If you don't need $370,000 and you only really need $250,000, we may just need to, waste away that $250,000 and, not waste away that additional $120,000 that you don't need, right? Why prepay those taxes at dividend rates? Maybe just let them pay tax at death at lower capital gains rates, or even lower rates using life insurance. And we'll introduce it in two ways. Now let Connie kind of come in to talk a little bit about the two ways that we'll introduce it, okay?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Leon. So, so I come in again and talk about positioning life insurance under this scenario. So when we deal with this scenario, there are two approaches that we can do it. The first one is what we call a traditional approach, and the second one is more like a hybrid way. So for the traditional approach, basically is, like Leon said, only waste what's needed for the income, right? And then we estimate the value of the shares left at life expectancy. And for insurance, basically is to buy insurance, right? To provide the liquidity and pay for the tax liability, right? So this is the traditional approach. The number two approach is what we call a hybrid wasting freeze. So in this scenario, Bill and Bonnie, right? So they don't need to waste the whole 370,000. They only need 250. So why don't we just keep that $120,000 in the corporation, right? And use that fundings every year to pay for a life insurance premium. So that is called a hybrid wasting freeze. So let's take a look at this visual chart. So this is the projected value for Bill's Class B shares of Holdco. So at age 85, right? So remember, we don't need to waste the 370,000 totally. So what we will waste it is 250,000. So basically the remaining, the $120,000 per year times 25 years, right? At age 85 times 25 years is equal to $3 million, right? And based on this calculation, we're still using the inclusion rate of 50%, right? Until, later on when they change to 67%. So based on that inclusion rate of 50% and a tax rate of 50%, so we calculate the tax liability at age 85 is around $750,000, right? So, so in this case, Bill, by not redeeming all the $370,000, leaving that $120,000 of shares every year. So basically, he will save approximately dividend tax of $1.35 million over the 25 years, right? Assuming a 45% dividend tax rate of Bill. So the traditional approach, there are pros and cons. The pros, because we already know the insurance coverage amount. So basically it's easier to provide some insurance solution, right? Specific amounts of coverage required. And then it's easily to use either a UL or par life policy, right? With the enhanced as the dividend option, a little bit similar to what we have done in the estate freeze plan comparison, right? However, there are some downside as well using the traditional approach. Remember, Leon talked about, right? What if the client passed away earlier, right? And not able to waste all the shares away. So that will leave the next generation a much higher tax liability. Remember the chart that Leon showed you, right? The parents' tax liability dropping, but the kids, right? The second generation tax liability is growing. So what if they passed away earlier, leaving much higher tax liabilities to the second generation, right? And then the other thing is, what if Bill and Bonnie, during the lifetime, they decided they don't need to waste all of the shares, right? Which that will leave a much higher outstanding number of shares down the road, and that will also generate a much higher tax liability way down the road. So with this traditional approach, the thing is the insurance coverage is based on a lot of assumptions, right? For how many shares the clients will leave behind, right? So this is the downside of the traditional approach. So anyway, when we look into selecting a policy for dealing with this wasting freeze, right? It can be a single life on the first spouse, for example, Bill, or it can be a joint life for Bill and Bonnie together, right? And for the solution, we can use the UL, but in this case, we want to show Bill and Bonnie, right? Using a par life, right? So we use the estate achiever pay to age 100, putting in $120,000 a year, which is, the portion that they do not need to waste, right? For that 25 years. And then we calculate the basic coverage amount. So if we are going for a single life just on Bill, it comes up with about a coverage of 3.38, right? We can also do a joint last to die premium payable to the last death, which come up with a coverage of about 5.64. And with Canada Life, we can also do a joint last to die premium payable to the first death, right? Which come up with a premium, a coverage of about 4.57 million, right? On all those cases, the coverage is, adequate, is good enough to pay taxes and for estate protection, right? But then in this case, Bill and Bonnie decided to go for the joint last to die premium payable to the first death. Good coverage, and then they don't need to worry about, continue to pay the premium upon the first death. So this is the plan they would like to go for. So let's take a look at the second scenario. What if we are going to use a hybrid wasting freeze, right? We talk about the traditional day approach, but there are cons, right? We don't know how long the insured person will live. Will they pass away earlier, or will they decide to not wasting all the shares, right? There are a lot of moving parts. So why not we just use a hybrid way to ensure this strategy, right? So what we are going to do right now is with that $120,000 a year, right? The portion that not need to be wasted, keep it in the corporation and use the corporation to buy the life insurance policy, right? So instead of putting in a traditional portfolio investment inside the corporation, we show them the value of a par life policy holding inside the corporation. So if you recall this strategy, right, we call it, we have a name for it, we call it corporate estate transfer strategy, right? Comparing a traditional investment portfolio in the corporation versus repositioning that fundings into a par life policy, make use of the tax advantage growth inside, right, for immediate enhancement as well as the CDA credit, okay? So in this case, we use a couple of assumptions to run this corporate estate transfer, or we call corporate asset transfer strategy. So every year we reposition that $120,000 sitting in the corporation instead of putting in traditional investment into a par life policy. So the par life policy, we use the estate achiever pay to age 100, right? Joint last to die premium to first death based on 2023 dividend scale interest rate. We just announced 2024 dividend scale interest rate, which is staying the same. So basically it's the same. We use paid up addition for this dividend option. So for the corporate investment portfolio, we assume it's a 70-30 mix, right? With the fixed income at a 3.5% growth rate, and the other 30%, we use a 6% growth rate. So for Bill, we use the tax rate assumption, right? At the highest 50%, the whole co also the highest at 50%, and the dividend rate 48%, capital gain we still assume using the inclusion rate of 50%, which is about 26% capital gain. Okay, so what we run the report out is the report can be a 14 pages report, but I'm not going to show all the pages here. So I just use one slide that which can show how the life insurance advantage over the traditional investment holding inside the corporation, right? So at year, is it 29? Let me see. Yeah, at year 29. So basically it's when Bonnie, who is 56 right now, at Bonnie age 85, right? At year 29, right? We can see that the net estate value, right, which generated with life insurance, which is the green line. Oh, I can't show the pointer here. So which is the green line, it generate about 6.113 million, right? Versus the traditional investment, the net estate value at the same year 29, which is at Bonnie age 85, is about 2.711. So you can see that the two line chart, they never cross over, right? So with doing that, we are helping, the corporation to generate a net estate value benefit of about 3.246 million difference. In terms of a percentage, it's about 120%, 120% difference. It's quite a bit of difference, right? So in summary, right, estate freeze basically is a good platform for, talking to your clients about, how life insurance can, adding in this type of planning, right? Wasting freeze, yes, it can be positioned as a transaction. It will take away some need of the permanent life insurance coverage, right? But then questions should be considered whether the clients need to waste all of those shares away during their lifetime, right? If not, like Leon said, if they don't need all the income, why prepay a higher tax rate? Because it has to be a taxable dividend, right? Versus, maybe a capital gain, which is a lower tax rate down the road in the future, right? And the other thing is, if they don't need to waste all the shares, right? Keeping some of, the fundings in the corporation, we may be able to show the client what is the value of using a permanent life insurance to do a corporate estate transfer strategy, right? So anyway, so summary is, for Canada Life, we have a team of the advanced planning team, including someone else like Leon, and he is the wealth and tax planning consultant, together with someone like me in the advanced case consultant role to help you to navigate through all those complex situations. And the last part is Leon might want to talk a little bit about the impact of the cash surrender value on the financial statement.
Is there any
Right?
questions yet? No.
Let me see. I don't see any questions posted yet.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so last part is relatively fast, and I just wanted to include this just as a quick overview of some of the questions that I sometimes get from clients as well as advisors. They're, as mentioned earlier, generally I sometimes see this situation, or sometimes I get the questions related to, okay, if we have a corporate owned life insurance policy, that cash surrender value, is that going to have an impact on the share value, right? So we, on our tax and estate planning group website, we actually have a pretty good article that discusses this in more detail. But just to give, a bit of some of my comments here, generally, what's the actual problem and where does it arise? Well, these individuals that are asking this, they have an understanding of, section 70, sub 5.3 of the Income Tax Act, whereby, the fair market value of a corporate owned life insurance policy on the life of the deceased shareholder or any person not dealing at arm's length with the deceased shareholder shall be its cash surrender value. And then the cash surrender value terminology is kind of defined under the Income Tax Act. But effectively, there is that scenario where potentially the cash surrender value, when it grows significantly, that could have an impact on the value of the shares, thus a impact on the capital gains, right? So very high level, just, some of the things where, with proper planning, and usually when we're doing life insurance planning, the clients are also doing other sort of planning with their accountants, just to show that, sometimes this impact might not be as drastic, or there might be other things that can help to mitigate some of this, right? So I've listed kind of three scenarios here. One, using what are the roll and redeem, or that spousal rollover, if you recall from our first section of this presentation, not an issue if that corporation has a corporate owned life insurance policy on, let's say, Mr. A. So it's a single life policy on Mr. A. Mr. A passes, he's deemed to dispose of his shares at fair market value, so that there could have an impact from the CSV, but he rolls those shares over to his wife. So his wife then gets those shares at the same fair market value, same adjusted cost base, and he doesn't actually trigger a capital gain on his terminal T1. So in that scenario there, the capital gains is not an issue because it was rolled over to the spouse. The corporation then has the death benefit, as well as, a credit to the capital dividend account. Generally, what happens there is usually, that Mrs. B or Mrs. A at that point would then take out all of that death benefit as a capital dividend, thus removing a lot of that value once again. So really not an issue if that happens. Secondly, in our estate freeze and wasting freeze conversation that we had, if you're doing an estate freeze before you purchase the life insurance policy, you're fixing your value of your shares already, and they're fixed value pref shares. You have individuals such as your kids or a family trust come in to have the common shares. If you had a corporate owned life insurance policy on, your life or Mr. A's life in this scenario here, his values are already fixed. Common shares, they don't really have an impact, because, well, assuming that it's a family trust or kids that hold it and they pass away after Mr. A does, then, that value will be included in the corporation, and then once again streamed out, and Mr. A's tax liability will be based on his fixed value pref shares, right? And sort of the last sort of note here is sometimes where, in this market that I work in, I often see, individuals that leverage as well, where they have a life insurance policy, but they also, let's say, collateralize it and take a loan. So that can help with some of the impact, just because of the fact that, just on the financial statements, you have that cash surrender value. It's growing up each year as it grows. But if you're taking loans from it, on your financial statements, you also have a liability, and those loans, are liabilities. Cash surrender value is an asset, but they can help to kind of offset each other, right? So these are just three things that, kind of considering, depending on what type of scenario your client is in or what their overall planning is, the impact of that cash surrender value on the value of the shares may not be as drastic, depending on, what they're doing, really. So really just kind of ending it off. And I think, Connie's already talked a little bit about this. Team of experts are with you every step of the way, all the way from fact finding, case development to new sales opportunities. Hopefully, throughout this presentation, and we try to do this from an advanced strategies for business owners setting, where showcasing how, Connie and I actually work together. So you can see, I generally do more of the, high level conversational pieces related to the tax planning aspect. And Connie comes in and helps out with the product planning, and we work, hand in hand with each other, alongside with the clients, as well as advisors, to come up to a solution for them. Right? Canada Life Elevate, your large case resources. I'm sure everyone has a good understanding of our regional wholesaling team. It's coast to coast to coast of local support for large cases, including life and living benefits. So as well as tax planning support. So you have me here for tax planning support. Connie's here for life insurance product planning support. We also have an individual called Lindsay. She works with the living benefits, and she's really the living benefits specialist there in that aspect. But also, after we work on cases together, we have that initial conversation. A lot of things happen in the back end too, where me and Connie are involved, such as, with the sales enablement as well as tax and estate planning team. Sometimes we get involved with the enforce support team just to ask them questions for enforce policies, transfers. We have a very good mailbox that generally for our policies, we can provide them with our questions for these enforced policies and ask them before we complete a transaction and say, giving some comments, product support, par account investment expertise, and our underwriting team. I'd say our underwriting team is absolutely amazing. Connie and I, once again, I think we talk with them probably on a weekly basis about the cases that we're working on. Looking at the insurance needs, looking at the justification, and helping them to position with our advisors. Okay? So all in all, tools to help you from Canada Life, quite a few things. As I said earlier, we have a tax and estate planning group website, and I think the articles on this website are very, very well written and drafted. So why I had mentioned it earlier about the impact of that cash surrender value on the corporation's share value. And we actually have a very good article on it, but I just wanted to kind of list this down just to show everyone, in any of these buttons, there's a library of articles that pop up underneath, right? So depending on what it is, the client, their accountant, or the advisor is looking for, we have a very good library, very robust set of articles that could be useful for your purposes. And I think I'll end it right here. Just kind of say that, in addition to our tools that we have from an articles perspective, from a support perspective, we also have a financial underwriting accelerator tool, which is kind of a PDF that was created by our financial underwriting team. It's really what I would say it is a one-stop resource for financial underwriting. So there's automated calculations in there. This tool really helps in calculating your client's potential insurance needs with Canada Life's underwriting guidelines kind of built in there. So really looking at those guidelines, filling it out can help you come up to a insurance needs perspective, as well as what type of coverage might be warranted based on our guidelines. Yeah. So.
Yeah, so thank you, Leon. And I just want to add on a little bit on the sales strategy. So for now, I believe majorities of you, I hope all of you can have an access to our new platform, the Workspace, right? The Workspace platform. So under that platform, if you go into there, you will notice there is sales strategies. There are tools that you can use, right? If you go into the sales strategies, right, you can you can find some sales strategies which have Chinese report output. So I just want to name it out. It's including estate transfer, corporate estate transfer, corporate estate transfer with collateral loan, right? Which is the name that we used in Canada Life. Basically, is the same strategy that most of you are using nowadays. Is the corporate IRP, okay? Corporation as well as individual. So those reports, we do have the Chinese output report. When you key in, you still key in English, but you can select to have a Chinese report output. So it's already in the Workspace. And we are hoping the web-based illustration sales strategy tab will be included. Well, if you go into that sales strategy tab in the web-based illustration, you can already find that there is the estate transfer, corporate estate transfer. If you click into those sales strategy, you can find there is a selection of the Chinese report output in there, right? So the next step is hopefully our head office can also include the corporate estate transfer with the collateral loan, which is like corporate ILP with the Chinese output in that sales strategy button in the web-based illustration. It will be coming very soon. Okay. Yeah, so that is all our presentation today. Is there any question? Feel free to put it in the chat room, or if you want to ask question, you can unmute yourself. Yes, Iris? Thank you. You can ask your question in Mandarin or Cantonese or English. Iris, 你要 unmute. You have to unmute yourself. Can you?